Hey, David Brewster here with a new episode of Chordplay, and this is Joe Pass Jazz Chord Secrets. And before I say or do anything else, I have to declare, I can't really play like Joe Pass. I wish I could play guitar like Joe Pass. Legendary jazz guitarist, Joe's career started somewhere around 1943, and during his lifetime and his career, he released over 100 albums. That includes studio and live albums. And he recorded and worked with a whole bunch of legendary jazz musicians: Duke Ellington, Ella Fitzgerald, Count Basie, Dizzy Gillespie, Chet Baker. There's a whole bunch of people. So definitely Joe Pass, was a jazz force to be reckoned with. Definitely a pioneer, icon, a trendsetter, a door opener. I mean, definitely a very important musician. And there was so much music pouring out of Joe when he would grab a guitar. Very inspiring. He was like a one-man band, and he did release a lot of solo guitar albums where it's just him and the guitar, and it sounds like an entire ensemble, playing, but it's just him. And if you're curious about jazz chords, actually over the years I've had tons of students ask, can you show me some jazzy stuff, or show me some jazz chords? And that came from rock and metal and shred guitarists, not just jazz guitarists, as students. So if you're curious about this, you want to tap into some jazzier ideas, maybe tap into some of Joe Pass's legendary music, this episode's totally for you. So like I mentioned during the introduction, Joe Pass worked with an assortment of jazz greats and legends. And if you're new to Joe's, music and his career, here's an image with some of the people he worked with during his career and lifetime. And for the viewers out there that are new to Joe Pass's music, or maybe they're new to jazz music itself, I'm going to recommend 3 albums here from Joe Pass that will definitely help you kind of dive in and kind of get an idea of where he was coming from. And this is also a great place to kind of start if you're new to listening to jazz, because Joe Pass albums are so inspiring, so musical. There's so much going on. There's elements, obviously, of jazz, but also classical. He's paying tribute to people like Django Reinhardt and different players and musicians. Very interesting. But here's 3 highly recommended albums from Mr. Joe Pass. So the chord-based examples in this episode actually came from a variety of sources, but I did pull some ideas from some classic Guitar Player magazine lessons that featured Joe Pass. I pulled this one from my library stash. With Joe Pass, the cover story, there's a lesson, there was a sound page too. But, I pulled some ideas from some different places. So we're not actually going to play Joe Pass songs, which I wish I could play an entire Joe Pass song. But what we're going to do is really just kind of chip away at some of his chordal approaches, which he was definitely sharing insight with these classic lessons with Guitar Player. And it's going to kind of help players move a little bit closer into understanding jazz chords, which is very complicated. And definitely if you're new to this, there's a lot of chords in this episode. So buckle up, even if you're experienced, with jazz, or if you're new to jazz. There's a ton of stuff in this episode. So here we go. Okay, I will break down and explain what I played during the opening jam a little later in this episode, but the first thing we're going to start with here is a chord warm-up that came directly from Joe Pass. And honestly, I can't remember where I got this from. It wasn't from Guitar Player magazine or his Hot Licks video or anything like that. I've had this for a very long time, and I just memorized it or kind of internalized it. And if my memory serves correct, it was just printed like on one sheet of paper, like a copy. And I looked through my stash of materials here and I couldn't find it. It's like a needle in the haystack in my studio. But the exercise itself is like this. So we're going to start way up here with this G flat major 7. And we're going to put it way up there. And then we're going to inchworm our way down the fretboard and start stretching and mutating these chords. But the basic idea for this, we're going to start with that chord form right there. G flat major 7, you could also think of it as F sharp major 7, but right there. And what's going to happen are the notes on the D string are going to move down chromatically, 1 fret at a time, while maintaining that top part of the shape. And then the notes on the G string are going to move down chromatically 1 at a time, and eventually the B string, and then eventually the high E too. But what basically is happening here is every time you move one of those notes, it's going to change the fingering for the chord. So every chord has a new fingering, like this. So here's the G flat major 7. Keep the top part, but move that root note down 1 fret and change your fingering like that. do it again, like this. And do it one more time like that. Right? So that first move. Now move the notes on the G string and keep everything else, the same, but your fingerings are going to change, like that, to this, to this, to that. Now move those notes along the B string right there, here, to here, to here, to there. This is tricky. And now the high E right here, to right there, to right here, and then right there. We're basically back where we started, but a little bit lower, because we started on G flat major 7, right? And now we're playing E flat major 7. So after all that, and that one and that one. So now we're on E flat major 7. Let's do it again, right there, right there. And do it again on the G. On the B. And then finally the high E right there, and right there, and right there, and right there. Now look where you are. Now you're on C major 7, and do it again. And we're slowly, like I said, kind of inching our way down the fretboard and stretching a little bit more each time. But there's C major 7, and just do the same process again. And keep in mind, you should go really slow. I'm kind of like trying to race through it here, because it's an extended exercise. And I also don't want this video to just be this exercise, so I'm trying to hurry through it. But then now the high E right there, and right there, and then right there. After another cycle of that, now we're on A major 7, so let's do it again. Probably see what's getting ready to happen right here, and then right there, and then right there, and then look where that last chord is, right there. That's basically an octave lower than where we started, because we started with G flat major 7, and then moved all the way through all those different, versions, and then ended on G flat major 7 right there. So I'm not sure what this exercise is called. It could just be a chord puzzle or a chord workout. But that's a great warm-up, and I use that all the time. It definitely keeps your fingers, kind of warmed up, and, you're basically mutating and refingering those different chords. Great exercise. Okay, next up, we're going to break down the art of crossbarring. This is definitely very common in jazz music, and Joe Pass definitely was, historically known for doing this. I think he actually shared this in his September '84 guitar player lesson. I think it came up in that lesson, and many other lessons too. But crossbarring's interesting. It's kind of weird. But, think of jazz. Let's play like a C major 7 right here. Right? Kind of a stock, C major 7 voicing right there. Very common with jazz guitarists. But up on the top of the chord, there's a C note, right? Which is the root. Right? But what, a lot of jazz guitarists will play more often than not is something like this. Right? And that has a B on the top, which is the major 7th of C, right? So if you look at the difference between this, you might actually be able to see what I'm doing right there, because I'm doing that. And the cross bar is actually happening with my first finger right there. I'm fretting, C on the 8th fret on the low E, and then I'm angling my finger over and catching B on the 7th fret on the high E. So I'm using one finger for two different notes on two different strings and two different, fret locations. 8th fret low E, 7th fret high E, and then you kind of fill in the rest of the chord just like that. So there's C major 7 crossbarred. And now you could also expand that into this. And that would be a C major major 7 sharp 11 now, and now I'm doing a double bar up there. I'm grabbing, 8 on the low E, that C note, and then I'm also basically crossbarring and catching both, this B note on the high E and that F sharp on the B string. So now my index finger is technically barring 3 notes on 3 different strings in 2 different fret locations like that. So that's very tricky. And I basically started with the C major 7 and then remove, this, that G note, and that transforms it into a C major 7 sharp 11 like that. So let's try that somewhere else. Move it down to G and do it right there. There's G major 7 cross barred. Raise up that D note. And there's G major 7 sharp 11. Real tasty chord voicing and a really unusual way to play it. Next up, we're going to basically find a chord progression and arrange the chords using common tones. And this is actually really common in Joe's music. He did this a lot. You can find it in a lot of jazz and classical and even pop and rock and other styles of music. And this basically kind of connects or links the chords. It's actually, good for the listener to kind of lock onto, and they're hearing this kind of mutually, shared note. And for this example, Joe is doing something like this. Something like that. So he's basically starting with this, G major 13, and that 13 is the high E open up there on top, because it's really just G major 7 until that high E comes in, right there, and then it's like an implied, E minor 7 right there. So he went from here to here, and then he hits that E again. Right there. You're also sharing the B note too. So there are multiple, shared or common tones, between those chords right here. And then right there an A minor 11 like that. And you're still using that high E open. So that's, a mutually shared note right there like that. Right there. And then this right here, this is basically a D7 over G sharp, which is really unusual. There's your D7 right here. But instead of a D root note, you're changing that to a G sharp over there. And you're basically, finding a twist in that chord because you're a half step away from the root of the next chord, which is that G major 7 we started with. So that's a really common kind of chord substitution, in jazz. Think, D7, but then move that root note over to G sharp right there. And then you could also kind of play with that F sharp. You kind of play around with that chord a little bit there in some different ways, but that's cool. Something like that. And finding, those mutually shared notes between the chords, it really does kind of give your ear something to follow along with. Really cool. Okay, next up we're going to basically hit a variety of Joe Pass chords in C minor, and this actually came from his guitar player lesson, the August '86 issue, and that was a very in-depth lesson, in that magazine. And for this, basically Joe was talking about playing, in the key of C minor, and then depending on what he wanted to do, he would kind of select from an assortment of different voicings and chords. So check this out. I'm going to loop, basically it's a C minor tonality. It's just really a C and an E flat, like that. So that's what I'm going to loop. And then on top of that, I'm going to play this series of different chords. So check this out. So I think I may have missed a few, but that was really just kind of a version of what he showed in the magazine, where he was moving through, like there's an implied C minor 9 down there, that C minor 11 that popped in up there, C minor 7 right there, he played a C7 sus 2 like that, C7 sus 4, there's the C minor 7 again, and then a C minor 13, and then I think he also included that right there. And then, let's see, I think I actually missed this one, that's kind of stretchier one. There's C minor 7 again, right there. But then he went to the bar right here. He also played a C minor 9. And then he reached up and grabbed this sucker, that C minor 11. And then he also played with this area. And that. And then he ended with that C minor 9 right there, which is really cool. And most people wouldn't really think about that, you know, being in the key of C, but it is. Because a lot of people would think of that as E flat major 7, right? Well, that E flat major 7 also happens to be, you know, a C minor 9. Okay, last but not least, I'm going to share what I played during the opening jam. And sorry to save this for last, but this is very difficult and definitely something that Joe did a lot. And that's that comping, kind of walking bass line, you know, sound, chords and bass together. You can definitely hear, you know, Joe Pass doing this, also legends like Tuck Andrus and a whole bunch of other people, Charlie Hunter. But for this, what we're going to do is we're going to walk between two chords. We're going to basically walk between a G13, which is right there, and a C9. At least as far as the beginning. Then there is like a jazzy turnaround, you know, near the end. But as far as the basic, you know, getting started moment here, we're going to basically, you know, hit this G13, play the open A, then you're going to hit that, you know, 13 partial right there, and then that, you know, B flat to C, and we're basically walking into that C9. So think of G13 here, and C9 right there, and we're really just finding a way to do this, right? And we just basically did G, you know, with that G13, the open A, and then that B flat to B. And then move into that C9. And then right there, you're going to play the low E, then the top part of that C9, and then walk that F to F sharp, and you're making your way back to G. Right? So this is really hard to do, but it's so cool. Type of progression is something I would start with this, and then of course you can expand that. This type of playing gets really crazy really fast, but with that we're just moving, just keep in mind we're moving from here to there, and we're just finding a way to connect those chords, and then we're going to move from there back to G, and we're finding, you know, so there's our bass line. We're just finding ways to connect them with chords. So that first pass through there, I was playing the chord hits kind of staccato, like real short. And right there's the jazzy turnaround. So G13, G sharp or A flat, moving into that A minor 7, and then B flat to B minor 7. So that G13, A flat, single note to an A minor 7, B flat to a B minor 7, and then F to an E7 sharp 9, the Hendrix chord, and then that B flat to A minor 7, and then an E flat to a D7 sharp 9, and then A flat to that G13 again, like that. So that's the turnaround. And I almost always slide some of those notes, which sounds like a fretless bass, something kind of authentic. Like that. So for that first pass, I played it staccato, and the second pass, you may have noticed I let the chords ring as far as those chord hits, and that ups the ante as far as the difficulty, because you have to hold on to those chords while the bass notes are still moving, you know, like this. Which is much harder than the staccato version like this. Because that version, as soon as you hit the chord, you can let off of it and then focus on the walking bass line. But then with the ringing version, like I said, you have to hold on to the chords, and that makes it much harder. As you can hear right there, you know, I just screwed it up. And then the exact same turnaround, I actually played it twice, like that. Plucked harmonic and then a harmonic smack, or, you know, tapped harmonic, smacked harmonic, whatever. But that's a really interesting way of playing the guitar, comping chords. And you can obviously hear jazz guitarists doing this. And as soon as I heard it, I actually heard it from Tuck Andrus first. And then I started to look around and I heard people like, you know, Charlie Hunter. And it took a while before I realized, you know, where a lot of that playing came from. And a lot of that definitely came from Joe Pass. Alright, that's going to wrap this episode of Chordplay with this look at Joe Pass jazz chord secrets. And like I mentioned at the beginning, I really can't play like Joe Pass. I wish. I'm working on it. And maybe one day I might get, you know, a little bit closer to that. But definitely, I mean, he was a legendary, badass musician and influenced so many people and changed the approach and kind of the overall, you know, sound of the guitar. Because I think before Joe Pass really started comping and whipping all that stuff out, a lot of people might have thought it more as like a solo instrument, you know, like soloists and stuff. And then Joe came out playing chord melodies and solos and comping and basically, you know, combining like bass parts and guitar parts and piano parts and guitar parts and stuff together. Very eye-opening, very influential, and forward-thinking too. He was thinking way ahead of the game. And then all these players had to catch up and try to borrow, you know, and learn some of his secrets. So even though I'm not really a jazz guitarist, I've never claimed to be a jazz guitarist, just like I never claimed to be a classical guitarist. I've studied classical, I've studied flamenco, I've studied jazz, but I'm a blues-influenced rock guitarist with metal, you know, and shred tendencies. But I also love acoustic and classical music, of course, you know, funk and all these different styles of music, R&B and soul and stuff like that. But I love jazz. I'm definitely warming up to it more and more as I get older and I start to kind of, you know, use more of what I've learned over the years. It's like, yeah, this is where all that stuff is, you know, and you see pieces and parts of it in other styles. But when you dive into jazz, which is like an ocean of music, sometimes it might feel like you're going to drown or you need a life preserver, but it's really exciting. I know it's way over my, you know, ability and my knowledge and my head, but I'm trying. It's that challenge that I'm interested in. I think that's pushing me, where it's like, yeah, I want to learn a little bit more about this secret jazz stuff. So anyway, leave some feedback and comments. Please subscribe to Night Lessons, and I'll be back before you know with more content and material. Thank you.